Two men, two legends, two very different CEOs. Today we're talking about Walt Disney versus Bob Iger. The Disney company distinctly different, we believe, than today's Bob Iger company. But you might wonder why. What is it about their two different leadership styles, the things they want and desire, that have led the magic to suddenly become the propagandistic? Today we'll tell you exactly what separates Walt and Bob. Hello folks, welcome back to the place where we continue to put the magic through the lens of, well, not reality. We won't steal it from Valiant Renegade. Not his slogan, no. Ours is keeping you ahead of the culture curve and explaining entertainment. And we're happy to do so, folks. Today we are talking about old Uncle Walt, still beloved, I would say, and Bob Iger, 2 showers a day, of course. Keep it clean. But Bob Iger has a very different style and a different goal for the Walt Disney Company than the founder ever did. It comes down to acquisitions versus creativity. We'll tell you what the philosophies are and why it's very important in recognizing where we are going with the company that creates our mythos, our legends, and the stories we share with our kiddos. Well, they used to create, right? Under Walt, this was the topic of my Patreon post this morning, comparing the leadership decisions of Walt and Bob Iger. Under Walt, this was an extremely creative company, and that's what caused it to be the growth engine that it was for so long. Under Bob Iger, the growth was achieved by acquiring other companies, and that would be wonderful if at the same time of moving forward with acquisitions, they weren't also emptying out those acquisitions with Bob Iger's cultural management styles, such that after 10 years, those very successful, very desirable studios no longer can produce great content because they're filled with ideological zealots. Looking at you, Pixar. Looking at you, Disney Animation. Looking at you, Lucasfilm. Looking at you, Marvel. Go ahead, Culture.
Well, no, I want to suggest some things. First of all, you mentioned the one area where they actually have some creativity, which was Pixar. They don't have that anymore. Then I'll mention something else that, you know, their style changed substantially. Instead of repurposing public domain tales like Andrew was speaking about, they acquired IPs, and no, they were not very good stewards. But they moved away in all frames from all of the different elements of IP that they own, from creating something timeless, something that is a shared human experience. Instead, they're focusing on the minutia of people's immutables. Right. The stories around your color, the stories around those things, instead of the things that as any human being goes through, the different joys, the different lows, the different successes, the different failures, the building up of humanity, so that you recognize that, from point A to point B, you have to work to get the things that you want. They took away all the timelessness. Everybody's immediately great. That's not a story. How did they get to greatness is the story.
Or even worse, the story is that they eventually figure out that they're able to defeat everyone. That's not a good story.
That's such great character.
Oh, yeah. But when you look at the Brothers Grimm, those stories had been around long before they were born. And your grandma, your grandpa told you that story when you were a kid, if you lived in those regions that those stories came from.
Yep.
Everybody loves their grandma and grandpa, I hope, speaking as one. But when Grimm synthesized it using their storytelling skills to say, let's take the very best pieces of that story and tell it better, suddenly everybody all around the world, whether they had a grandpa or grandma who ever heard of these people or not, had a way of accessing it. And that's the brilliant synthesis that the Disney storytelling brought to these timeless tales, and that they've totally lost their ability to do.
But to add to that, Lou, you have parables, fables, all these things that have been these generational storytelling mechanisms that allow us to share those experiences through time and to build upon them. The Grimms built on it. Disney built on it. But then I go back to this amazing thing called Song of the South that everybody wants to talk about as racist. And I hope Lorena is back right now to tell us the stories that are being told from that point of view.
Yep, I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry, what I missed.
No, do you want to tell everybody what those stories were? That
Where the Joel Chandler
that are now
stuff came
that
from.
are now that are now supposedly racist.
Oh, well, first of all, let me tell you that those were rabbit stories were told by my Jim Crow South raised grandparents. Oral tradition, those stories passed down as a way to exemplify how you used your brains to fight against either a system or people who were trying to either oppress, deceive, or trick you. Those stories are not just, let's say, proprietary to America, but to also the Caribbean. There are a bunch of African fables that are taught to teach. It's not just a story, it's to teach, in the same way that the Brothers Grimm stories weren't there just to entertain, but they were also there to teach you. Now, I have no idea why people think Song of the South is racist. You have people who very fallaciously will say, oh, well, it's about slavery. No, Song of the South was set in the antebellum South, meaning during Reconstruction, meaning after the Civil War. Another thing that people either ignore or don't know about Song of the South is that not only did you have black sharecroppers in that story, you had white sharecroppers in that story too.
Yeah.
And that's not told at all. And then you'll get the thing of like, oh, well, they seem subservient or whatever to the white people in the story. It's like, maybe you don't understand what the antebellum South was like. You had the social order that had been turned onto its head, and people trying to learn how to get along for the most part. There were plenty of people who were former slaves, but when they were freed, didn't really want to leave. So they stayed on for wages instead. And those ties that they had with the family, they didn't just go away. Those were actually nurtured. And how do I know that? From the stories that have been passed down from my grandparents and my great grandparents, of the ties that they had with white families, even past slavery. So it wasn't like they all hated each other. That totally was not the case at all. But what you had with these stories is a great way to pass on lessons of not being fooled by appearances, aka the Tar Baby story, which is one of my favorites. Thinking your way out of a situation, like, hey, please don't throw me in that briar patch. Little do you know, in the story, it's like, you guys can all kiss my ass because that's where I was born at. My father got in trouble at school for telling that story exactly the way that I just told it, that I just told it to you. But what I find is people seem to call Song of the South racist because they're uncomfortable with how the people talk in that story. And they're like, they just sound, I said, sound like what? My grandparents sounded like that. What are you trying to say? There's something wrong with them, with the way that they spoke. A lot of them were not very educated, but they were very smart in other areas. And that is how they spoke. My grandmother wasn't, she didn't feel that she was educated, but she made sure to make sure that I did not talk like her. She's like, I want you to speak properly. Even if I don't know, you are supposed to speak properly. So it offends me when you have people out here saying, oh, these people, they sound like slaves. They sound, this, that, and the other thing. So you mean to insult me and basically say that my ancestors sounded like that? My grandparents sounded like that? Who are you to say that to me?
And by the way, it's not just about Black people in the southern U.S. One of the interesting things that happened when the Soviet Union finally started letting Soviet Jewry go to Israel is that these people were astoundingly unsuccessful in a capitalist society because they expected everything to be catered, lousily, but catered, because that's the way they grew up. They had to learn how to be free citizens, even in a relatively socialist country like Israel at that time. This is the story of humanity and of making transitions. It's not about race.
And Brer Rabbit was those stories are metaphor and allegory, because Brer Rabbit is the young black man, and Brer Fox and Brer Bear are the slavers, and he's constantly outsmarting them. And there are times when his temper gets away and he is outsmarted himself and gets himself in danger. We won't talk about the specific stories where that happens, but the final, the grand finale of all of that is when he's thrown to the briar patch. And what he's suggesting there is that he is a hardened, wise, smart individual who can handle being tossed into the most difficult of places, whereas they cannot. They can't even fathom that he could survive there. That's allegory. It's not, folks, shocker. It's not actually about a rabbit being thrown in a briar patch. It's allegory for the elites. The elite slavers can't follow you into the hard places of the world that you have overcome because they're unable, and they're actually not the smart ones at all. That's the story. We should be teaching that to kids. And if you don't like the Chandler side of it, fine. But let's go back to the actual folklore that came over from Africa, and let's talk about it, because it's a huge historical part of the African slave experience. And frankly, it's those stories are a great gift that has been given to society, but now being stripped away. And folks, we are at that end yet again, but despair not, for more content is coming your way right here on the Pro Channel, 3 times a day, usually. Also, don't forget to check out the Pro Show live on Tuesdays. And coming up this Tuesday, it is a great one, because we will have post-Disney earnings call analysis like you will not find anywhere else. Folks, like, share, subscribe, click it, stick it to the algorithms, it's the notification bell, and drop a comment down below. Why? Well, because we covet your comments. We care about what you think. We want you to be a part of a community dialogue. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and as always, keep having fun.